missed. Good morning, everyone. Molo Prof. Molo, everyone. My name is Thamsanqa Mthengu, and I'm from the Faculty of Commerce, and I'll be your host today. So I can see the reason why we are delayed, it's because the plenary had already started. I was eavesdropping and I heard people talking about Africanization and so forth. It shows that today's theme and topic is very interesting. It talks to reality. It's not for the sake of talking, but it's about shaping ourselves as Africa. So without any further ado, because we are a little bit late now, I will just highlight what we are going to start with. We'll have Professor Siepe introducing our keynote speaker, Dr. Moses Kakane. And then afterwards, we'll have a panel discussion on the topic hosted by Prof. Siepe and the coordinator. In our midst, we have very important people whom I feel like I need to introduce because there's no item of introducing guests. So in our midst, we have our Vice Chancellor and Principal, Prof. Mtose. Let's clap. Because if we don't clap. And also, of course, we have Dr. Moses Kakane, who is the advocate and senior counsel in Johannesburg. He's not here alone, he's with his family. His wife is here, and also his nephew is here. Can we give them a round of applause? Yeah, it shows that families do support when we do amazing things. Advocate Dr. Moses Kakane has a book. We've bought 14 copies, so I'm now advertising his book, The Odyssey of Liberation. I'm gonna buy one myself as well. And also we have in our midst, we have, of course, Professor Siepe, who will be our discussant, and also we also have Mr. Godi and our sponsor from ABSA. So let's clap. You were supposed to clap without me having said you must clap, and you know why. And also we have our Dean, Faculty of Commerce, Administration and Law, Professor Railing. Can we clap for her as well? Okay, without any further waste of time, I would like to call upon Prof. Siepe to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Moses Kakane. Can we clap for him as he comes forward?
Good morning. Morning, Vice Chancellor, colleagues, Dr. Skakani, Deputy Dean and the Dean. We are continuing with our journey. And as a way of entry, I would like to say the following, or to quote the following. No true liberation project can be meaningful without an aggressive decolonial agenda. It is coloniality that has pervasively conditioned society to accepting that Europeans that invaded and enslaved Africans are epistemologically superior to those they colonized. Decoloniality is therefore the necessary debunking of these myths of white superiority and black inferiority, so that we can create an anti-racist society in the continent of our birth. Decoloniality should seek to unsettle and disrupt the settler colonial logic and the normalization of Western and imperialist ways of being. It is about creating spaces for new philosophies which are indigenous and antithetical to the logic of Eurocentrism and whiteness, unquote. Those are not my words. Those are the words that were uttered by Dr. Skakani. Those are the words that he said when he delivered a lecture at the University of Zululand. You should, when you hear those words, say, but that sounds very familiar. The fact that doesn't sound familiar means that some of you were not listening attentively or might have been asleep. But given that we're not watching you on the screens, we shall pretend that you were listening while closing your eyes. I now have the pleasure of inviting Dr. Skakani. Often we produce people with PhDs, and none of them, or few of them, have the courage to say, here I stand. And in this book, The Odyssey of Liberation, Dr. Kakani is saying, here I stand. It is a book that when I read it, I saw an embodiment of Biko. I saw the embodiment of Marcus Garvey. I heard the voice of Nelson Mandela, Nyerere, Frantz Fanon. And it's one of those books that I always say in my list. The books that you should read before you die, not that you die soon. Without much ado, because we're going to have a feast of ideas and nourishment, may I call Dr. Skakani to deliver a paper on the demystification and de-Westernization of our legal system and constitution. Thank you.
Yes, I don't know what to do with this laptop. No, it's fine. There's a Catholic prayer, Prof. Siepe, that says, "Angazi ukuthi ngiyofanini noma kanjani noma ngofelaphi." So you've talked about people reading my book before they die. Because we don't know when we will die, better hurry. Prof. Mjose, Prof. Siepe, Professor Greiling, who's always behind me in the pictures at the University of Zululand. And people ask me, who's that white woman who's always behind you? And so I've not cropped you out of the pictures. I've kept it there because you're following me. And all the academics and colleagues who are here, and of course I must greet APSA. You told me that it's important that I recognize them. But ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to be here. And the topic that I'm dealing with is always difficult because it's difficult because it shouldn't. It shouldn't be difficult, but I thought I should start with a quote. And I'll tell you where it comes from at the end. Open quote. It says, "Suddenly, he saw the city as a vast network of thoughts. Courts were places where people went to study the laws, not places of judgment. The library, which he took to be one building, but which he later discovered was practically the whole city, was a place where people went to record their thoughts, their dreams, their intuitions, their ideas, their memories, and their prophecies. They also went there to increase the wisdom of the race. Books were not borrowed. Books were composed there and deposited. The universities were places for self-perfection, places for the highest education in life. Everyone taught everyone else. All were teachers. All were students. The sages listened more than they talked. And when they talked, it was to ask questions that would engage endless generations in profound and perpetual discovery. The universities and the academics were also places where people sat and meditated, and absorbed knowledge from the silence. Research was a permanent activity, and all were researchers and appliers of the fruits of research. The purpose was to discover the hidden unifying laws of all things, to deepen the spirit, to make more profound the sensitivities of the individual to the universe, and to become more creative. Love was the most important subject in the universities. Entire faculties were devoted to the art of living. The civilization was dedicated to a simple goal: the perfection of the spirit and the mastery of life. Close quote. I'll give you a book if you can tell me where this comes from. I'll give you my book for free. This is the most cost-saving exercise I've ever done. Asking a group of Africans to remember a book. Well, this actually comes from a master of a novel by Ben Okri. It's called Astonishing the Gods. It's a modern novel about a young man's journey of self-discovery. And most critically, for our purposes, it's a journey of his quest to understand his invisibility, why people don't see him. In his world and in his journey, he encounters an island full of other invisible people. And he has a world that he wants to discover. And the question is, why am I invisible? Why does the world not see us? And so the fable, or this novel, explores themes of perception, of truth searching, of suffering, and the transformative power of experience. And it challenges readers to question their understanding of reality. Now, the topic today is exactly that. And thank you for inviting me to share my ideas here, some of which have become controversial. Controversial because we're not ready to reimagine ourselves, to unlearn what we know, to unlearn what we were taught, to unlearn our prejudices and biases, to unlearn what I call paradigms of Eurocentric epistemic traditions of knowing. We're comfortable knowing what we were told to know. We're comfortable becoming products of an ice cream factory that produces people that repeat what oppresses them. I will try and show this distortion about how knowledge starts and how our universities should approach the endeavor of knowledge production. And I do this not just with narrow philosophical questions of what knowledge is, but how knowledge itself can be so distorted that no other knowledge really makes sense. And it's for that reason that when I make these views and I state them, a lot of people are uncomfortable. They are uncomfortable because it's difficult to unlearn what you've been taught to perceive as the only universal truth. And the universal truths that we teach, that we imbibe, that we've always known, are truths created by what I call Eurocentric and Western paradigms of knowing. Because we were taught that being African is actually being the other. I asked a politician who phoned me that I should help them once with something they call the Traditional Courts Bill. And I said to him, because he thought it was a very radical intervention to have traditional courts. And he said, we want to do this, it's very progressive. And I said, why do you call it traditional? And he said, because we're trying to accommodate our ways of life as Africans. And I said to him, isn't it a shame that 55 million Africans have their lifestyle called the other, accommodated? And I said to him, so what's the mainstream? If African life has to be named traditional, what is mainstream? And it's for that reason that the approach to education for me must start with the fact that I believe that South Africa and many other post-colonial African states are not African countries. South Africa is not an African country. It's a country in Africa. And there's a difference between an African country and a country in Africa. Geographically, we're here. Philosophically, we are in Europe. So the topic of demystification and de-Westernization of knowledge reveals the dominance of the Western world over other continents and other civilizations, and what I call alternative modernities that may have been erased from history at some point in the past centuries. As the world became smaller and the world became the Western world, became Europe, the people we taught how to write, the people we taught measurements of the pyramids, the people we taught algebra came back with knowledge to teach us. And we believe that we had been tabula rasa, blank with no knowledge, and accepted knowledge that we had taught them. And like gold, as we do with our minerals, we send them raw to Europe, and they come back as badges of Louis Vuitton, of necklaces and everything we buy, and we forget that it was us, we produced them. Knowledge is like that. Africa taught the world civilization. We taught them algebra, the art of writing in Egypt. But we've accepted that we're not the ones who produced knowledge. We are recipients of knowledge, like wheelbarrows into which laborers pour sand. We are recipients and critical recipients of Western knowledge that has become common sense to us. And so I talk about alternative modernities because I want us to think of knowledge as an amalgamation of different modernities and experiences of different places that are equal, that are culturally equal. But they cannot be culturally equal until we unlearn the dogma that we were taught about our identity. And so, Eurocentric and Western ideology denotes that knowledge has as its source the European form of modernity, European civilization, which of course is not only false, but also an insult to other continents and other forms of old civilizations. The trumpets of independence that heralded independence of the colonized world rang hollow when such independence was not accompanied by the reversal of the miseducation that accompanied colonial conquest. Because colonial conquest would not have happened without teaching those you were conquering that they were not human. And even in the field of law, the reason that for years, for centuries, we are unable to solve the problem of Palestinians, of Israeli aggression against others, the reason the entire world is unable, all lawyers put together are unable to deal with the issue of human rights across the world, it's because we have not agreed about who's human. Until we agree about who is human, we cannot agree about human rights. Because there are hierarchies about who's human. It's God, Europe, white people, and the rest. And until our education system reveals the equality of who we are, we will be unable to crack the edifice of colonialism. And until we teach our people to unlearn what they know, until we define knowledge originally and authentically as a way of life of a particular people with an identity, so that when they meet other civilizations, they are able to meet other civilizations and forms of modernity as equal partners than wheelbarrows receiving noble knowledge. It goes without saying that the antithesis, as I said, of coloniality is decoloniality. There can be no liberation without that colonial mindset being cracked down from the foundation. And the fact that some of you or some of us are uncomfortable with these questions reveals the depth of the problem. The fact that we are comfortable not knowing, we are comfortable with our inferior status, we are comfortable with the perennial insult that we were not human, we had no knowledge, we didn't know, we didn't produce knowledge before Westerners came, just reveals the depth of the problem. Accordingly, no true liberation project can be meaningful without an aggressive decolonial education agenda in every faculty. Engineering, commerce, law, education, drama, everything. If you look at the education system of imperialist forces, you will see that every facet of what they teach is ingrained with an imperialist agenda. And it goes without saying, therefore, that an anti-imperialist agenda must crack at an educational and philosophical level the foundations of colonial conquest, in the mind and geographically. Decoloniality is therefore the necessary debunking of all of those myths. So much has been written about knowledge. And Plato grappled with this. And of course, he was not African. And we quote Plato and Aristotle with pride because we accept that we did not have any concept of knowledge ourselves. But let me quote him and see who between Plato and African philosophies about knowledge was superior. He defines knowledge as justified true belief. And yet so little is known about how our continent, that Marx and Plato and Aristotle themselves, as bright as they were referred to as the dark continent of non-humans. So little is known about how philosophically Africans have grappled with the idea of existence, the idea of the concept of what should we know, what do we know, and how should we produce what we must know and what we must remember. And of course, the process of knowledge is an amalgamation of experiences, of identification of historiographies of people, what they know, but most importantly, what they remember. And colonial conquest taught us what to remember. So it shaped our memory. And knowledge has a source, and its very first source is perception. What we see when we are born. And of course, it looks like a neutral tool of grasping knowledge, but it's not. What did we see when we were born? What did we really see when we were born and we opened our eyes? We saw a world in which our parents, our mothers were servants. And so when we talk about perceiving, even perceiving itself is a product of those who surround knowledge. Even the Bible, move away from Plato a bit, has made its own statements about knowledge. In fact, from Genesis, you will see that knowledge is described. Genesis 1, verse 28, is one of the important lines that has been abused for colonial conquest. I'll get to it now. But what does the Bible say about knowledge? Forget Plato. Proverbs 1, verse 7 says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge." Already you are channeled to see knowledge in a particular way. Just fear the Lord and knowledge is there. In Proverbs 9, verse 10, a parallel declaration is made that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom and knowledge of the Holy Spirit. I'm not preaching. Now, of course, where did it all go wrong? A lot went wrong because what was ignored in how we define knowledge was the philosophies of the cursed people. Because it's biblical that we curse, it's in that history. Non-existent people, invisible people, people who were discovered, who were sleeping, did nothing. And of course, Genesis 1 verse 8 was what actually ushered in wrong, distorted interpretations about what each group of human beings must do to colonize others, to think about knowing and production of knowledge. And it says, and I quote, "And God blessed them. And God said, 'Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it, and have dominance over the fish of the sea and over the fowl of the air and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth,'" close quote. Sounds logical, rational, but many races regarded this as a statement of subjugation of every other living human being in other continents. And up to today, generations of two sons of Abraham are still killing each other because one believes that this was an instruction to them to subjugate every other race. And Israel has interpreted this to mean they're a special race that must subjugate everybody. And it was extended to Europe. Europeans believe that they have a monopoly over humanity and wisdom and knowledge. Now, even these biblical verses, as I said, have been interpreted to define knowledge. Knowledge has been contested from origin. And who has the divine blessing to rule over the other has intensified domination of peoples of Africa by Western powers. It is the unlearning of these tragic and delusional doctrines that must be at the center of knowledge and education of the new species, what Fanon calls the new species of man. People who can reimagine themselves differently, rethink, reconstitute themselves, because education is about reconstitution of self and the understanding of the world around you. Now, Plato, as I said, stated that knowledge is effective cognitive state which adheres to the truth and as a priori. Well, close quote, simplistically, it it has been common knowledge that knowledge is finding new ways of doing things. That's what it is. Knowledge is finding new ways of doing things in order to master life. And life where? If you are in Africa, in the colonial world, it's not for you to master life. It's for you to serve what I call is the colonial man, the conqueror. So knowledge is created by a series of acts of discovery by each society. Within academia, the history of knowledge is regarded as that field covering the accumulated and known human knowledge, constructed and discovered during human history and its historic forms, focus, accumulation, bearers, impacts, mediations, distribution applications, societal context, lived conditions, and methods of production in a given society. Now, if education must contradict the colonial myths, the colonial values, the colonial knowledge systems, and coloniality itself, the coloniality of nature and power structures founded upon the supremacy of Eurocentrism and Western ways of seeing and Western ways of being, then decoloniality is the process of delinking from Eurocentric knowledge systems and epistemic paradigms, ways of seeing the world and ways of being and ways of thinking and ways of seeing yourself. I asked people on Friday at a particular function, if I asked you to close your eyes, would you be able to imagine a different self, thinking differently about the person sitting next to you, seeing the world differently? Most of you would not be able to. Because our perception, our brain, and what it takes as knowledge and what it takes as common sense is all shaped to save a colonial education system. One of the things that are missing in our education system, caused by the fact that we are unable to unlearn, is that we do not teach critical thinking, which should be a cause, whether you want to be a lawyer, an engineer, or a pilot, is the ability to think differently about yourself. Of course, the main source of knowledge, as I said, is perception, which comes by the usage of the senses to experience the external world. Introspection is the way of knowing internal mental status, processes, and deep personal motivations and sensibilities, but it's also about how you see the world. And I asked students once as a teacher, as a history teacher, the first line in a book was South Africa was discovered by the Portuguese in 1498, and then somebody else discovered us. A group of 90 men and women from Dutch discovered that in April 1652. And I said to them, rewrite this sentence. And they all changed the grammar and all of this to say the same thing. Each one of them was still saying the same thing. They changed it from the active voice to the passive tense and all of this. And in the end, I said, okay, don't write like the Portuguese or the Dutch that found you. Try and write like the person who was sitting in his yard and a group of 90 Dutch men and women came. Write it from that perspective. Pretend you were the person who was discovered. What would you write? And only then they could write. A group of 90 foreigners invaded us and started beating us up. Right? And I said to them, that's the problem with history. It's been full of lines on the mind of those it colonized. Before I get to law, let me tell you a story about 1960s to see that lawyers are a different type of people. And I can say this because I've traveled from being a teacher, or a failed priest, teacher, lecturer, and everything else, and an advocate. Lawyers are very different for a number of reasons. When they go to university, when law students go to university, as you all know, most student leaders, student activists are law students. I think we've all seen that. I was SRC president at Wits, was doing my LLB, and different, since the 70s. But that activism for lawyers hardly outlasts graduation. Hardly outlasts graduation. Try and find the law student who was active at your university as a student leader, as a SASCO member, and a ZASO member. They are sitting down frowning upon activism. Because in the end, law teaches us to be conservative. It teaches us to be uncritical. It teaches us to accept the rules, the laws, as valueless tools of the rule of law. When the opposite is true, is that law is probably the most important tool of political control and economic control in any given society. And when you hear lawyers say they are not political, you must know coloniality has worked. When coloniality teaches you to accept the status quo as normal and that it is abnormal to question it. Because lawyers by nature also believe that being aloof, being obnoxious, are both virtues. And so as we try to unscramble what I call colonial education, we have to wear a different hat, instill in ourselves a different mindset of imagining something we do not know. To imagine ourselves as full, equal human beings made in the image of God, or the other way around. I usually say the other way around because historically, I'm not clear whether God made us in his own image or we make him in our image. The jury is still out, because if you trace history thousands of years ago, the gods that people worshipped in different religions, even today, was their imagination of a god. So they made God in their own image, a huge man sitting somewhere, or a huge fat lady sitting on top of some beam. So we have a symbiotic dialectical relationship with the image of God. We make him what we think, and we think he made us in his image. And education is that kind of thing. We produce what is relevant for what we want to do. And each dominant elite class produces knowledge that is good for its survival. Only Africans and people of the South have abandoned producing knowledge that supports their humanity and their survival. And the reason you are not political, it's because coloniality has worked. The statement that you are not political is very political. It's a choice you've made to be apathetic. So, there's been some different debates about what can universities do to negate this. Achille Mbembe deals with this, Prof, I think, much more pertinently. He assists us in defining what should be the philosophical foundation of de-Westernized and decolonial knowledge. He writes in his paper called Decolonization of Knowledge, I quote, "Decolonization is not about design, tinkering with the margins. It was about reshaping, turning human beings once again into craftsmen and craftswomen who, in reshaping matters and forms, needed not to look at the pre-existing models and needed not use them as paradigms," close quote. That's the difficulty of decolonial education. is that it forces you to get out of your old self. And in this way, new ways of knowledge production must radically shift our paradigms, redefine who we are. Because the first thing we know when we open our eyes at birth is to try to grapple with who we are. And that perception of who we are is not neutral, it's not valueless. As you are born, you define yourself in terms of the surroundings that you see. Whether you're going to see yourself as a slave or a master is the function of what you are born into and what you are taught and what knowledge you find having been produced and what memories are passed down from your generations, because memory is an important tool of control. And so, as I say, education must be a process of unlearning. It must also be a dual process of remembering and dismembering. Forgetting what you know and remembering new things. The role of new knowledge and new ways of knowing is to produce what Fanon calls, as I say, the new species of man, referring to a decolonized figure that is self-identifying. The first knowledge is knowing who you are. And in knowing who you are able to assemble knowledge that you need to remain who you are. And societies are built around institutions of higher learning or institutions of learning at whatever level, who are able to teach people to reimagine themselves and learn what they know. Because the process of learning, the process of knowing, is a continuous, perpetual endeavor for humanity. And Ngugi says this, I quote, "If we are to do anything about our individual and collective being today, then we have to coldly and consciously look at what imperialism has been doing to us and to our view of ourselves in the universe." He continues to tell us that, as I quote, "Education is a means of knowledge about ourselves. After we have examined ourselves, we radiate outwards and discover peoples and worlds around us. With Africa at the center of things, not existing as an appendix or a satellite of other countries and literatures, things must be seen from the African perspective. All things are to be considered in their relevance to our situation and their contribution towards understanding ourselves. In suggesting this, we are not rejecting other streams, especially the Western stream. So those of you who think I'm a rejectionist of all things known from other continents, perish the thought. All I'm saying is that you must engage with other streams of knowledge as a full and equal human being knowing what you know, so that you can take to the world your authentic self. And that's the role of a university. That's the role of a faculty, of engineering, of law, of everything, is to create people who can think differently, who can proudly present themselves to Europe as equal human beings, who have something they know and are prepared to engage with the world to see what's relevant in the world for their own society, not the other way around. And it takes me to an observation about South Africa and many others. As I said earlier, South Africa is not an African country. Our universities are not African universities, of course, except University of Zululand. And I'm actually not saying this lightly. I say this because this starts with the ability to think differently. And I said to Prof when I had the pleasure of being awarded the doctorate that I do not know what I would have done if a liberal university, I'm a product of liberal university, I'm a Wits. If Wits had decided to award me a doctorate, I think I would have refused. I think I would have. In fact, I'm sure I would have. Because it's important for us to acknowledge who we are. Because somebody tells us which universities are number one and which ones are number two. And so, de-Westernizing our mind and our education must start with us accepting that identity. And I was told that I must look a bit at the law. If you look at my book, I deal with this at the end in the epilogue. And I tell 3 stories. Stories of how different people have faced the law. And what is it that faculties of law must do? First of all, whose law? To govern what? To regulate what? Which constitution? To regulate whose affairs? And to produce what socio-economic relations in a society? And so decolonizing knowledge, or let me say decolonizing law, is itself a component of decolonizing knowledge. And it's forcing law students and others to think differently about law. There's so much in law that we should question. Those of us who are called anti-constitutionalists, it's a term that I've heard bandied around by people describing me. Because we are told to accept that there's only one form of constitutionalism. Constitutionalism and a constitution are not the same. Constitutionalism should embrace every constitution in the world depending on how that society wants to govern itself. But South Africans, including a lot of my law professors at Wits and everywhere else internationally have been, believe, others deliberately, others knowing very well it's untrue, this belief, there's only one form of constitutionalism, is the liberal type of constitutionalism, the one that places the individual at the top of everything rather than the collective. And so decolonizing law must start with us accepting that we're a people fully capable of rethinking what should govern us. And so our constitution must be embedded and rooted in who we are and what we want. And there are many constitutions that do this. The Bolivian constitution does. You go to, here in Mozambique, Article 109 of the Mozambican constitution. It has a much better description of land than our Section 25. And so the constitution itself, the so-called best constitution in the world, I've always wanted to know, and I think I know who came with this phrase. Who came with this phrase? Okay, I know what he is not. First, it's a man. Because men are at the top of the pyramid. And I think he's white. And maybe he's not white, but he lives comfortably. Only a comfortable person who's not part of the 70% of desperate majorities of people can praise a document that has not changed the status quo. So we must rethink our laws because law is not valueless. And so our law lecturers must start looking at law as a tool of whatever philosophy that society wants to impose. There's no neutral law. There's no neutral lawyer. In fact, a neutral lawyer is a supporter of the colonial project. By being apathetic, by being neutral, you choose a side philosophically. You choose a side that does nothing about the status quo. There is nothing noble about being apolitical. It's not noble at all. In fact, it's the biggest selling out you will find in the world, that you are an observer. There's no observer in societies. Other people who support others or those who don't. As I said on Friday, each human being is judged by 2 things: what we do and what we tolerate, which means what we don't do, but are prepared to watch. So all of these things should mean that law itself must be taught differently. The Constitution must be restructured to reflect the aspirations of the people. And lastly, constitutions emerge from post-war situations in every country. And so they are written and put in place to change a particular war situation or turmoil in society. And so what should they do first? What should laws do? Laws must first be used as tools to achieve what that nation has decided is its new philosophical outlook, its new ideology. If your ideology and your task is liberating others, the Constitution must reflect that. If your Constitution is the antithesis of what you were fighting, which in our case is colonialism and apartheid, it must frontally state that as its object. I'll ask you to go read our preamble in the Constitution and tell me whether it reflects really radically and frontally what we seek to change. We, the people, noticing the injustices of the past. What injustices? It could have been the Anglo-Boer War. You know why? Because we are unable, we think it's impolite to state that we are an imperialist, anti-colonial, anti-racist state that fights colonial conquest, and that our Constitution is designed to crack the edifice of colonialism. We do not want to say that. It's for that reason that this important document, this important best constitution in the world, go read it from first page to the last page. It doesn't mention apartheid, not once. And so our education system must learn to be impolite and frontal about things that affect humanity. We need an education system that's radical, de-westernized, challenges notions that we know. Because you can never, even at a personal level, societal level, and government level, you can never solve a problem you are unprepared to pronounce. No one can solve a problem they are scared of mentioning, even mentioning. So your politeness, your desire for things to move on is itself a political statement of being conditioned to fear stating the truth. And law must do that. And our faculties and our different faculties must challenge the educational notions that are Western. And if we do that, we shall have started, not finished, we shall have started the journey of creating education that is relevant to the continent of Africa. And maybe, the trumpets of liberation that were rung since the 60s will not ring hollow. They will mean something. And I have said again, those of you who are in this house, you in particular and others who are young, I think our children must never forgive us. Young people must never forgive us for the betrayal we've done to them, for failing to confront what has confronted our people all along, for being polite about things. And for as long as we have laws that tolerate injustice, we will never be free. And so knowledge must be the bedrock of the project of liberation and cultures of challenging what we know. And each faculty must look at what textbook it uses and why it teaches what it teaches. Thank you.
Sure. Somebody says, Achesamateki. Well, it's a language I don't understand because I don't know what take is. Yeah, you know, there are times when you listen to a speaker and you know that you need to take a moment to let it sink. And this is one of those lectures and presentations that needs to be replayed a number of times within this university. And we want to thank Dr. Skakani for making yourself available. We want to thank you for the struggles. We want to thank you for associating yourself with these people outside this continent, call it a great university. And I can assure you that this university is one of the few universities, if not the only one, maybe I should dare say the only one, where use of African is taken seriously. Many other universities have always been proudly calling themselves European universities, and as outposts of Europe, proudly so. And we still have some with names like Rhodes University, about a man who is guilty of a genocidal project where many of our people are killed. And then you have black people in those proudly associating themselves with that and not wanting to change the name. And that actually tells you the extent to which there's been colonization. I had invited Professor Akpome to be here with me to reflect, but the nature of the presentation may require that we change tune by simply also inviting colleagues to make their comments from the floor. But before doing that, I thought I should register a few takes which should be themselves very provocative and should be disturbing, but should also be an assignment. One first take that Dr. Skakani put before us, and it's a question that you must, when you go back and you look at the curriculum, is to say, in quoting the work of Ben Okri, the question is, why does the world not see us? And if you then go back to what you teach, ask to what extent is that curriculum having an imprint of who you are? And one of the things that he also raised was the issue of appreciation that there are pyramids of knowledge. And what we need to do is to ensure that the African knowledge participates in that dialogue among the pyramids of knowledge. And I should also say, Professor Mtose this evening will be extending that discussion in a presentation which I'll tell you later. And Dr. Skakani also made it very clear when he spoke about what knowledge should do, that it should be about the new ways of doing things to master life. And we must ask ourselves whether are we in the business of learning new ways for the mastery of our lives, where we determine our future. And that cannot happen without delinking from the European paradigms. And again, it has a curriculum implications, and we must look at that. And of course, when we talk about curriculum, even those of us who are teaching or cheating, we need to be not frightened, but understand that part of our biggest problem is we are ignorant of the alternatives. And we're even afraid to think of the alternative. And hence the subject of unlearning and asking what is a form of knowledge that we must learn following our rejection of the Western mythology. And I guess also one of the most important aspects, especially in this country, is a point that he had raised sharply, that coloniality lives beyond colonialism. And this is very important because when you raise the subject, people tell you that apartheid is gone. But it also shows the extent to which we have accepted the normalization of the status quo. And that the choice of saying we are apolitical is a choice where we say we are proudly apathetic about who we are and our conditions. And in thinking forward, we should be moving towards not being only recipients, but we must be people who are engaged in crafting a new reality. And you can only do it if it comes from you being centered. So the whole idea of Afrocentrism becomes quite important. And of course, he could not talk about this without bringing the issue of law into the picture. And to ask fundamentally, whose law to govern and regulate who and what? And making a distinction between constitutionalism and the Constitution. And this evening, Professor Mtose will be taking us through a paper which builds on this. And the title of the paper is deliberately provocative. It says revolutionary thought as a precondition for epistemic freedom. And in that, she calls that this would be a case for disciplinary disobedience. I don't like disobedience. And of course, what the title is saying is what Dr. Skakani was saying, that if you have a lawyer that says, I'm neutral, I'm apolitical, you should know that the brother or the sister is lost. Because any lawyer that claims to be apolitical is a lawyer that tolerates the status quo. In concluding, he asked or pointed out the following, that people are known for two things. One, what they do, and second, what they're willing to tolerate. And I added that they're also known by who they associate themselves with. And I'm reminded of one fellow who tried to go to the moon 4 times and didn't make it, but that was still an achievement because he was very close to the moon. And when he was asked, what can you claim to be your claim to fame and success? What do you owe it from? And he says, there are 3 types of people. Those who make things happen. The second group, those who watch things happen. And the rest are those who wonder what happened. I want to believe that Professor Mtose and this university is gravitating towards the first, where we make things happen. And lastly, that education should fundamentally be about the liberation. But I'll be doing a disservice to the presentation if I don't mention the most obvious fact that Dr. Skagani put before us, the notion of location. That we may be here physically, but most of us are not here. You know, when we grew up, there was a song by the OJs, your body is here, but your mind is on the other side of town. It's the same as most of us, that our physical location is here, but our cultural location is not here. Our epistemic location is not here. And for us to be an authentic African university, we must have a convergence of both location, both culture and epistemic location. If we do not have that, then we are lost in the sea. May I ask Professor Akpume to come and make some remarks, even if it is simply an expression of how you were provoked.
Vice Chancellor, guest speaker, Professor Siepe, colleagues, good morning. Thank you for this opportunity. It's a wonderful thing to listen to you twice at close quarters. And as I told you, I left my book, but I think I'll buy another one so that you sign it before we leave. That's very provocative. I'll just touch on two things. You talked about, I think that's very powerful, a country in Africa. And then Prof. Siepe has taken it forward. Some people may be here in body. But is it not the case, Prof., that those who are not here, they are also not in Europe? They think they are in Europe. They are like a corpse that is not buried. They are not in Europe. Many of us here, we pretend like this Africa is so beneath us. Some of us meet sometimes when we go to conferences overseas. You know they don't accept you there. You know. Sometimes you get into a train, they move away. We are not in China. We are not in Africa. We are not in Europe. We are a corpse, a ghost wandering that needs some rituals to find where you are. So it's better for us to be in Africa. And it is one of the reasons I'm happy to be in this institution. I say that not to please the Vice Chancellor. Yes, because I have had opportunities to apply elsewhere. So I didn't take permission from her. Please, I don't want to leave. Yes, it's my decision. Also my decision to be in South Africa. I'm Nigerian. I experience xenophobia. But it's my decision to remain in South Africa, regardless. I'm not here by force. I'm not held hostage. It's a positive choice that I make. So my advice is for us to take the words of the advocate. Be here. Let's be in Africa, in our thinking, in our living. Even our brothers and our sisters of European heritage, if they want to be very honest, they are also not in Europe. It's better to be where you are. This is the home we have now. Whether given by God or by history, let us make it our home. I like your contestation of Fanon. I think that's one of the signs of great scholarship, is confidence. Professor Efe talks about it all the time. Intellectual security and confidence. Not many scholars of this tradition will say, I disagree with Fanon. It sounds a bit heretic. It's what Prof. Makoni did when we did a departmental conference the other day. He disagreed with Ngugi. At first, I was at this podium here. I thought it was like, this is scandalous. But he made his point, and on that score, I shifted allegiance from Ngugi to him because he made a very powerful point. He was talking about language. Ngugi makes this great argument about indigenous languages, which I fully agree with. But Makoni is saying that language is not something you can itemize. You can't really separate languages. So he's saying, if we are keen, if we say we want the promotion of indigenous languages, if we keep separating isiZulu from isiXhosa, from English, from Afrikaans, from all the other languages, we will not succeed. Because history does not have an occasion in which any language existed as a hermetically sealed entity. He got me converted. But the point is, are we willing as scholars to demonstrate, to cultivate that level of intellectual sovereignty? Because if you do not feel intellectually sovereign, you will not attempt to challenge an authority. I thank you for doing that very well, sir. I will end with when you quoted Okri. You said, in what he said, quote, "We were all teachers, we were all students." And I'd like to challenge my colleagues, are we ready to be students? And to be a student is not to be a learner, in my understanding. Are we ready also to teach? Prof. Siepe knows this. And we are working on something, Vice Chancellor, it will soon come to your table. We are working on doing a theory camp where we charge colleagues and students to theorize, to move away from learning the theories about mathematics to what Professor Siepe tells us, to mathematicize, to challenge established ideas, because that's the core. You use the word unlearn multiple times in your presentation. I think you used it more than 10 times. Because if you are unwilling to theorize, if you are unwilling to see the world and propose an explanation for the world beyond that which we have received, then all we will do is we'll gather and we will be taught. We will be taught how black, how ugly, how diseased, how backward, how primitive we are, how primitive our parents were, and how we are, how our children are also going to be even more primitive than our parents, how useless we are, how we need to go overseas to get ideas. We always need to invite people from somewhere else to teach us. We always need people from Wits and Stellenbosch to come and teach us at UniZulu. We always need people from overseas to come and teach us in South Africa and Africa how we need to live our lives. That is what we will ever hear. If we are unwilling ourselves to learn the world, as you said, new ways of doing things to master life. That's what you said. But the last thing, sir, I'll challenge you. So let me take some of the courage that you have brought. And so I'm an advocate for, not that advocate, not like you. I'm a non-disciplinary legal expert, by which I mean I keep the law. So I've not been jailed or charged for anything. So I think I'm a legal expert in that regard because I understand the law so well that I've been able to stay out of prison all this time. So as a non-disciplinary legal expert, I challenge the idea of declaring that we do not reject Westernized, by which we mean colonial, imperial ideologies. We often make that. Is it not also a form of being polite? Like I tell my colleagues, my day job, which I am employed for, which I'm paid for, is to teach English. But I say I'm not teaching Shakespeare. I'm not teaching Wordsworth. I'm not teaching Joseph Conrad. I'm not. And people say, oh, we can engage Shakespeare and engage Ben Okri. I say no. If you want to teach Shakespeare, but me, nah, I'm not teaching Shakespeare. Because Shakespeare is coming into the room and will suck the air. And is going to be now the point of reference. Those theories are going to be the point of reference. And we are going to now line up our indigenous theories, our indigenous ideas, and try to see how they measure up to Fukuyama, how they measure up to Vygotsky. And then we begin to examine things that happened in Kwadlangezwa during COVID in 2000, and we invoke a dead European because he's supposed to be the scholar. He's supposed to be the giant. We invoke somebody who had no idea. In his wildest imagination, he could not imagine that something like COVID could happen. So that is, if we have a chance for a private engagement, that is what I will take up with you, sir. But I want to thank you very much. I thank you, sir.
For Professor Aya and the legal scholars who are here and students who are online, one of the questions that Dr. Skakani had to answer which for some led to a form of controversy. As a practitioner of law and a person who appears most of the time in court, he responded to that question in the lecture that he gave at the University of Zululand in the most emphatic way. He asked, am I provoking people to rebel against our much celebrated political settlement, some of which are exaggerated as a miracle, rainbow nation, or the famous yet hollow phrase, the best constitution in the world? I repeat, yes, am I provoking to rebel against the best constitution in the world? His response is, yes, I am. In fact, I'm asking that we do a multiplicity of things all at once. First, we must debunk the myth that our political settlements were designed to achieve liberation. Two, we must reject aspects of the post-colonial constitutions designed to ensure the continued survival of white power, privilege, and global dominance over the peoples of our mother continent, unquote. So that question is asked and has been responded to. Now, colleagues, I'll invite those of you who want to be like him, rebels with a cause, or even those who are rebels without a cause. He's a nice guy. Don't be intimidated. Oh, man. Oh, man. Okay, Professor Aya. Yeah, you can come here. And followed by Professor Khalin.
Thank you, Dr. Skekane, for that very informative talk. Lawyers have always been accused of being very boring speakers. But I think in your case, we can say that it was not boring and everyone listened attentively. I'd like to start off by saying that I think we can accept that the legal profession in South Africa is conservative and very traditionalist. And I think we have a challenge on our hands to change that. If we look at just our normal court practices, you know, in terms of how we dress to court, our robes, I think still using bibs, and in some African countries, I know in South Africa we've stopped, but using the wigs, which I think is still taking place in a lot of the African countries. But I always tell my students, in terms of the structure of our courts, if you look at the hierarchical structure of the courts, we have the presiding officer right at the top. And then we have our child complainants, children. I've defended rapists years back. And I remember one of the complainants was a young 10-year-old girl. And just looking at us in court, she broke down. She couldn't testify. You know, so our court systems, our structures of our courts are not designed for some of our children. But I think going back to what you said, are we the problem? Are we ignorant of our identity? Have we decolonized our minds? And I think I can say that we have not. And we as lecturers, we as a university, we have an important role to play. And if you look at the University of Zululand, if you look at some of our post-grad students, I know we had our student last year, and the topic that we chose was decolonizing the reasonable person test. and moving away from the Eurocentric approach. And that topic on its own is very sensitive, and one of the examiners was an acting judge. So we are very keen to get the comments from that judge. So I think in terms of the work that we're doing, I think it's very important to choose those types of topics. One of our master's students yesterday, one of my students, focused on secondary victimization of child complainants in courts. Now, what we're saying is that just testifying in court is just as traumatic as the actual rape incident. And our courts are not designed to make it easier for those children. So those are some things, something that we need to look at. So I agree with you. You've mentioned aggressive decolonization agenda. I think as law lecturers and lecturers in all disciplines, we have an important role to play. Very interestingly, you mentioned new person. And last year, I addressed the Law Society at their AGM, and I spoke about a new age lawyer. And something I spoke about was critical thinking skills, which you've mentioned. So our students need to have that critical thinking skills where, in terms of their identity, they're comfortable with their identity. I think we're living in a new age in terms of technology, and that's something that can also serve as an obstacle to developing those critical thinking skills, which I discussed. But just to say, yes, we have a huge role to play. In terms of, for me, the starting point is decolonizing our own minds. We speak about decolonization, but you cannot decolonize, for example, the curriculum if we don't decolonize our minds. And I think that's very important as a starting point. So I'd like to thank you for your talk. I've taken down a lot of notes. In fact, I can go on for, I think, also an hour. But I think, I agree with the fact that it's very important that we reshape. It forces us to get out of our old self. We choose topics that we challenge existing legislation. We always tell our students, look for gaps in the existing legislation, and that will make a very good postgrad topic, which is very important. Remembering, dismembering, very important concepts. Engaging with other streams of knowledge. So, for example, our law students, we focus on South African case law rather than foreign case law. And when we're speaking about ethics, for example, in legal practice, we ask them to look at a recent case law where attorneys have been struck off the roll, attorneys in South Africa. So you can now address this with us as to the reasons for them being struck off the roll, so you don't make those types of mistakes. But yes, we'll go back to class and also mention some of the key words that you spoke about and incorporate that into our teachings. Thank you.
I'm speaking to the colleagues after advocates talk. I've been a lecturer for 45 years. This is my 45th year here. And I must say, for 40 years it was easy. And the last 5 years were the most challenging years of my life, because I had to challenge myself every single moment in terms of everything that I've studied. And I've done a PhD, and I published, and I've written textbooks, and I've done everything. And economics is a study of self-interest. You put yourself, and you make profit, and you win, and you exploit, and you do everything, and then you're successful. And then suddenly, you're confronted with the reality of nothing is working. I've said it previously at a conference of decolonization, where I felt so lost, because the people around me, my people, is not benefiting. through my studies, through my research, through everything that I've done. I'm not making a contribution. Where am I wrong? What is wrong? The wrong is forget about this and put the human first. We are humans first. And the people around me are my people. And the people that I want to see to flourish and to do well. And if the system taught us to be apolitical, higher education says, please, 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 no politics, apolitical, you don't say this, you don't say that, you teach in there. Be neutral. Just teach the newest information and theories and methods and methodologies that is available, and preferably the American ones and the UK ones, because they know best. That is what we've done. And keep the status quo. And that's what we were taught for all these years. For 40 years. It was so easy to do this. And I think I was one of the best economics teachers in the country, doing it for 40 years. But now I understand, and now we see, this is not what is benefiting our country and our people. And now we have to relearn. It's a challenge, it's hard, it's constant reflecting, going back, decolonize, dethinking, rethinking. And I understand a lot of my colleagues are struggling with this. They're really struggling between this that they were taught for 20 years or that they were teaching for 20 years and now rethinking. It's a very exciting time. It is a time where, for once, we can make a contribution and not just reflect and replicate and feel frustrated when you sit down and you start to compare the results and they say, oh, I will never repeat this, but an American that said to me, you can easily solve your problems in Africa, just go read this book from Samuelson. Now Samuelson was a very known economist with about, I think it's maybe edition 25 or something already floating around. You know, just that arrogance of telling me, read Samuelson, and then you solve all the African problems. And that is what we were also indoctrinated with. So, advocate, as a white person, I'm standing here, and I've also been misled. And I've also learned the wrong things. And I also have to relearn. And I also have to refocus in this. And all my younger colleagues, this is the time, this is your time to make a change in the history of this country through a university that allows you to think for yourself and to change and not to be apolitical and not to be neutral. And please take this to our students and tell the students not to shy away from making a comment, not to shy away to differ, not to shy away if they don't agree with you, because you might be the one that's wrong. There's no right answer at this stage. So please take this opportunity, embrace this opportunity, listen to the people that understands, and relearn, really relearn. As Prof. I say, decolonize. Forget about all of these rules, regulations, theories, frameworks, policies that is not doing for our people, for what we're supposed to do. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, Professor challenged me. Let me deal with that first. You see, because I'm a lawyer, I choose my words very carefully. What you thought you say I said, is not what I said. Because I said we must actually not reject other streams, but I was careful not to say we must accept Western streams. Because South Africans tend not to think that there is law in Ghana and Nigeria and Egypt. And so what I was saying there is that we must engage other streams of knowledge and modernity from places that have had the same experiences as us. Not everybody outside South Africa was a colonizer. Some of our brothers and sisters in West Africa are dying in dilapidated boats trying to go to Europe, leaving their own country. And so I think I agree with you. We can't actually accept what subjugated us, but we must accept streams of knowledge from places that are relevant to our experiences elsewhere in the world and elsewhere in the continent. And then you talk about dress code. There's a story I wanted to tell you and I didn't finish it. In one African country, the lawyers did one thing admirable, they thought, after independence. For the first time, they marched, they protested. It was unheard of for lawyers to wear their robes and protest. And they had a demand, one demand, a letter of demand. And what was the demand? Please, whatever you do, don't take away the wigs and the robes. I tell you, it's a true story. And one of the difficulties in law now is to teach a student who's always imagined himself walking, wearing a black gown and a bib, just walking proudly down to the High Court, to tell them that suddenly we can rethink the dress code. It's a very difficult thing. So I agree with you, the Prof was here. There is a lot we must do about those things, but they are painful because they are challenging what we know, what we grew up thinking. I'm going to carry a gown on my left hand and walk down the street and people will be in awe. There are other ways of being proud without being Western. And lastly, Prof. Heiling, you've made this point, and it's actually a point you made in the lecture I did. Because people don't understand what I mean when I say we must create laws and curricula that are human, that are anti-Western. They think I'm anti-white. I am actually anti-racist. And I don't believe in creating what I call false non-racialism based on fear and politeness. I believe that when human beings are taught properly, live equally, live in a country with socio-economic relations that are equal, what will result from that is a non-racial, truly non-racial society, not forced, not Mandela's rainbow or Bishop Tutu's rainbow that is imposed, but when socio-economic relations are equal, color diminishes. And so the law must be like that and what we know. And so I agree with you, Prof. Heiling. It's actually about humanity placed at the center of every faculty and everything we do. Thank you so much for this. I really liked engaging with you. Bye.
Thank you very much to all the panel discussion participants and also to Dr. Sikakane for a mouthful of ideas about reimagining South Africa. Without any further waste of time, I would have loved also to reflect on what our keynote speaker was on about, because I was also taking some notes. But because we are 25 minutes behind time and we've eaten into our tea time, we can only, I'll allow Prof. Heiling to give the gift. Then what will happen afterwards, we'll just go outside and take a group photo and then grab our teas and go to our respective sessions, because we are very much behind time. So I will allow Prof. Heiling to come up for, and we just do a quick photo shoot, and then we go outside for our group photo.